Welcome to another episode of Dear Future X. We have an exciting guest for you today. Reese, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good, yeah. Just came over from Covent Garden.
Wow, that's excellent to hear. So let's get straight into it. What's your background, Reese?
Yeah. So I consider myself a social entrepreneur, community builder, and speaker. I was born and raised in Hong Kong, moved here like 3 years ago. And yeah, I've just been really involved, integrated in this sort of London University entrepreneurial ecosystem since. And yeah, just been exploring different things as well.
Yeah, you have quite a lot of titles. Yeah, that's one thing I realized when looking on your website onto your LinkedIn. Which one would you say is the one that, if you had to like pick one of them, that you're like, this is definitely me? I know all of them is you, but like, which one are you most proud of, would you say?
Yeah, that's so hard. That's tough. I'd say I'd have to sort of bring it all the way back to the organization that I think really shaped the trajectory of my life, that really, I think, created the ripple effect and the foundation for everything I do. And that was the nonprofit I started all the way back at 16 called ISSIA HK. And what's crazy about it is, yeah, I'm 21 now, and that's literally like 5 years ago. And the organization is still around, and it's still sort of part of my personal brand. It's still something I give back to, I'm involved with. It's still something I support. And that's the organization that I think I pay tribute to every day.
Would you like to explain to anyone watching, anyone listening, what exactly your nonprofit did?
Yeah. So back then in Hong Kong, for context, very academically oriented environment, like Asian sort of city. And, people are doing extracurriculars for sure, like your MUN debate, but there was no scope and space for project-based learning, right? There was no real scope and space for people to do sort of social impact projects or these like entrepreneurial projects. And so really the value proposition was, how do we create a space for people to just work on projects, peer-to-peer learning, learn from one another? So super simple concept. It's like a network. We started that off. We got like our first 100 students, and we kept scaling from there, and it spiraled into basically an organization where we let and empower young people to just build projects. I think that's really what it is at its core. And in the end, we had like 500 volunteer staff across 80 schools working on like 30 different projects, ranging from like media work, like podcasts, docuseries, all the way to like in-person events. And I think really the reason it worked wasn't that it was like a fundamentally innovative, crazy like concept or like technology backed, right? It was community. And then secondly, it was scale. The fact that it was such a simple value prop that we could bring to schools, we can like bring to new people. And it's like everyone wanted more skills. Everyone wanted to work on projects, easy to scale. So we made it very big. Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about scale here. And how exactly did you do it all?
Yeah.
With the funding, with the scaling?
Yeah.
Because it's pretty big.
Yeah.
Like we have here, like, you did around 80 schools, 500 students. That's pretty crazy, especially if you imagine average guy having this vision. How did you go about achieving that?
Yeah. So I think really, again, we started off like this idea of a network, right? There was no product, there was no service. It's like this vague idea of just a community. But what really I think allowed us to scale was when I introduced like a magazine. So again, super simple product. People are familiar with it and I have to go, oh, it's a magazine. But this was what it taught me. It's this like lesson in value exchange. So when you go to someone, you're asking for something, what's the dynamic, right? You're like, oh, they're like offering free help. Maybe they might do it if they're like, very generous, they want to give back, but what's in it for them?
Yeah.
So for us, our sort of customer, I guess, or who we had to persuade was schools, right? Schools had to basically help us advertise this opportunity. We had no built-in distribution channel ourselves besides like word of mouth. So magazines, super easy to understand for school, but what's in it for them? It's an opportunity for people to contribute, right? It's like an opportunity, like a competition for students, right? And as a teacher, as an educator, that's a great thing for you guys, right? It's like, we got to share this with our student population. It's a value add. It's not just a random organization that's trying to like use us for free advertising. And so they did. They shared it. We had like 50 students sign up for like the first edition of the magazine. We used that as an excuse.
For the first edition?
Yeah, for the first edition.
Oh, wow.
And I guess it kept going. We also used the people who signed up to just contribute to a magazine to do other projects, right? So we had the pipeline, we had the distribution channel, boom. We were able to keep recruiting, create like a consistent funnel of people who wanted to like work on other things as well. But I think the lesson there is we didn't just sort of take from these schools. We had, hey, you have a thing that is actually useful for your students. It's not just like sort of purely our win. It's a win-win situation.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like
Value exchange.
it is. It's like, do you think for people out there watching or listening, if they are thinking of starting something similar, do you think it's always value first rather than taking?
I think so. I think that's how you really get started. That's how you get traction, is you're offering help, right? I think the issue a lot of times in entrepreneurship is you're very if you're very salesy, right? You're sort of pushing and forcing a product. But if you offer value first, I think you start off the relationship and the transaction with a very good foundation. So I guess the modern day sort of example of this is like a podcast, right? Or it's like a blog, or it's like you're running a society, inviting someone to speak. Fundamentally, what's happening there is, it's just like a pod, it's just like a speaker event, but you're offering some value, right? You're saying, hey, I want to talk to you, I want to engage you, but I'm not just going to take your time. I'm offering some level of value exchange, no matter how small. And that really sets you apart, right, from anyone else who's just can I do a coffee chat, or can I talk to you for 15 minutes, pick your brain? The people that are truly sort of a tier above are hey, I have a platform. I know it's not much, but it is value. And that, I think, makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Can I quickly ask, you talk about the magazine. What was the magazine about?
Yeah. So basically it's all around social issues. So people are writing about all things like LGBTQ plus rights, or politics, or sustainable development goals. And we had everything in-house illustrated as well. So people are doing graphics and the full cover. So I guess it's a whole business operation. And I think that was a lot of the value add. There was a lot of the impact in readership, who read it, where we distributed it, all of that generic metrics. We found that the biggest impact metric was actually internally, when you're running the whole operation, right? When you're doing the whole design from end to end, when you're running the whole show. That was actually the biggest value add, is you're giving pre-professional experience, I guess, for people to do production, and also for illustrators to have stuff in their portfolio. So I think skill building was a huge part of it. Yeah.
That's really interesting. And I just want to point out, you were 16.
Oh, yeah. It was a while ago, I guess. Yeah.
So you were in high school as well, correct?
Yeah.
So when you first started this, did you begin with your school itself?
Interestingly, not really, I guess. The minute we started it, the product was I guess, inter-school by nature. And that was kind of the niche, right? Again, it's not it's a radically, the innovation here is that, instead of a school magazine, it's inter-school. And a lot of the times, I think, in a market that isn't that saturated, that's all it takes. You just need to be a step above in terms of value exchange and offerings that is slightly more unique, slightly bigger, slightly more interesting, slightly better run. That a lot of the times allows you to sort of, I guess, stand out. So I guess we didn't even start from my school per se. It was actually just we parachuted it because it's such a scalable concept. And so simple, so easy for people to understand, right? Everyone knows what a magazine is all about, right?
When you say inter-school, correct me if I'm wrong, is it just one magazine which multiple schools are using?
Yeah, I suppose, yeah. So, I mean, we primarily did online editions. So it's literally we had contributors from all these schools, and then we'd redistribute it via the schools as well for school chapters we set up, or for other distribution channels. So I guess it's so easy to do. It's just that no one, I guess, historically, they're okay, we're in a school, we just do this magazine club, I guess. There wasn't never an impetus to just scale it slightly more. I think that lesson is, again, for everything else, right? It's you can do things in one unique context, but the sort of necessary fuel to scale a bit more isn't that much, actually. It's just it feels uncomfortable. You might not know anyone, it might take a bit more effort, but it's it's not that big a step up, to be fair.
Because I can just imagine, you're 16 years old.
Yeah.
And when it comes to distributing these magazines between schools, did you yourself, just 16-year-old, rock up in a random school, went to the head teacher and were I've got this for you, please distribute it among your students?
Yeah, basically, yeah. I guess it took a bit more effort. We had to set up chapters, which I think the issue of this education space is generally schools are very terrible customers, so to speak. Number one, they're not really willing to pay. So obviously they're not really a good revenue stream. Number two is that timelines, right? It's it's a school cycle, half the year is holidays. Students are only there for 1 year. So it's you set up a chapter, it takes a while to maintain and set up and hand over. But that's what we did. We did chapters. I mean, we had enough of an inbuilt network ourselves where we also didn't necessarily rely on schools. We could just distribute it our own socials or our own networks and all of that. And we had enough of a brand at that point after a year or two where people just go directly to us. We didn't need the schools. as much as well. But it's a tough ecosystem. Yeah,
it's really awesome. And the project was called, is it ISSIA?
Yeah.
ISSIA? Yeah. Have I said that right? Or have I butchered it?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
You got it right, yeah.
And this was whilst you were in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
So the first question we asked you was, what the main thing you think resonates with you as a role? And you mentioned this project, and that's where you started essentially. Where did you go from there?
Yeah. So I think, like, funnily enough, I look back and, I'm in my final year of university, and if I think back, like, what are the organizations that I'm drawn to, or what are the things I run now, fundamentally, I think I'm still using the lessons from, like, way back then. What does that mean, right? I think it's primarily community driven. So it's very much like people driven, and the biggest differentiator is generally scale. Again, something like that. So the Entrepreneur Society I run, or Global Shapers, or this Learner Strategic Consulting, what they do well isn't that they're fundamentally sort of like innovative in like a deep tech way, or in like a sort of like a technological innovation. But what they do well is that they use like human capital. So like people, they're all people power, volunteer based, strong communities, and also like very large in scope or scale, either in that like a global connection, or like they're able to just like be a very well-run organization and well-oiled machine. I think that's what I've drawn to. It's like I love leading people, managing teams, managing like institutions, structures, scaling them, taking them to the next level, coming up with new ones when there's a gap in the market. So yeah, I think that's how it still translates. It's basically still the same DNA of the things I kind of do. So yeah, I've been enjoying it.
Because like, I see you're a very people's person, right? As in like everything you're talking about, like connecting people, communities, even like a social entrepreneur and stuff. Like, there's a lot of like connecting people, interacting with people. Usually, like, and correct me if I'm wrong, usually whenever someone is so passionate about something like this, I feel like there's a backstory behind all of it, whether that's like something that happened when you were young, or something that really inspired you when you were 16. So when would you say, or what's that first instant that you remembered as that turning point that you're like, no, this is, I want to be a social entrepreneur, I want to connect people, I want to begin my journey on this?
Yeah, I think there's like several moments, but also like different like evolutions of that desire. I think the first one, again, I don't know how conscious I was, right? Like to say, oh, I want to do this. But one of my earliest memories of like this affinity for like people and leading is like back in primary school in like grade 5, 6, I guess I was like 10, like 9, 10. One of the things I found myself doing is, you know how in like a playground, there's like toys, there's literally like resources, I guess, right? On like the playground. One of the things I found myself doing, and I'm like, I wonder why, like I'm trying to like think back. But what I do is like every lunchtime, I basically organized groups of people where we would take the toys. We would like get there before anyone else, right? We'd take all the toys and we'd set up like what I called back then a trading station. So it's like a market basically. So
at 10 years?
Yeah. Wow. Like literally it's like, I guess kind of weirdly capitalistic, right? And like kind of shady if you think about it. But we're like, take all the freaking toys and be like, hey, like if you want to like get these toys, you have to like trade another toy. And it's like a market, a literal market where we have people like standing around there and like literally trading it. And it's like, why did I do that? No idea. I guess I just liked doing that. And like even back then I'd be like walking around in groups, like leading a group, and it's like, again, I think back and I'm like, why did I do that? It's kind of weird, but I guess it's just, again, this affinity to like building something from scratch, I guess. But again, it's not like I'm building a product here. It's like the resources aren't even my own. It's like the schools, right? But it's that like manipulation of like the what's already there, but also like leading people, grouping people, like bringing people together for a common goal. So I think that's one of the early stories where I'm like, okay, I guess I have this inclination or tendency towards it, right? But it wasn't like intentional. I wasn't like scheming or crafting about it. It's just like a habit, I guess. And I suppose that's kind of how I approach it. It's like a habit of leadership where like I did that, and then I did things in high school, and then I'm doing things now. And it's always, I think, a habit. But I think there's certain moments during my work where I realized like it's also something that compounds, right? So you do it like in high school, you do it well, you practice that skill, so there's the internal part, but also like there's external legibility, right? People know you for doing that, so you're able to keep doing it, do it better, do it more, do it at a greater scale. And I think there's a certain path dependency there for me, where it's like, I guess I've honed that craft a bit more and more and more slightly every time I do it. where now I'm like, okay, this is what is like a strength for me or a superpower in some ways at some level.
It's like the ripple effect that you're talking about.
I guess, yeah.
Where like that one splash,
it
really creates a lot of
like a ripple
ripples.
effect. Yeah, and it's like, again, I think that's why I'm so passionate about this idea of like early education. This idea that actually the decisions you make early on in your life do matter a lot, because they can either set you up for success and create these success spirals, or they can make your life very hard. They can make it such that you have these lock-in effects that make it hard for you to escape from and start anew, right? It's possible, but it gets harder and harder every decision you make.
What would you say is like that one decision that most people need to make when they're younger to start that ripple effect? Obviously, it's different for each industry. But there must be kind of like that one common question people can ask themselves, or that one thing that someone can do to really discover their leadership role. Or
that's an interesting one. I'd say like, I mean, to be fair, even the subjects you pick in like KS3 or like A-levels or IB kind of like shapes possibly a lot of like what you might choose to do in the future. So I think that's one starting point. It's like, think about why you're picking those subjects. Like, are you drawn to it for what reason? Like, is it parental pressure, or is it like peer pressure? Like, is that just what you're good at? And then it's like being able to look at that and be like, okay, I'm doing this just because I'm good at it, or is it because it's actually a career path I want to pursue, right? I think that's like one of the earlier ones. But even like the university you choose, right? It's like, which geography do you want to be in? Like, is it a big city? Is it like a campus-based university? What do you want to prioritize in your university days? Is it like meeting new people? Is it finding community? Is it honing life skills for adulthood? Is it getting ahead in a very specific career path? Is it like to earn as much money as possible? Like, what are your motivations from first principle? Because I think when people don't, at that point, again, a lot of the times I look back and I'm like, that's what I was thinking. But I think even then, right, I wasn't like consciously like scheming or planning out my life this meticulously. But I guess like hindsight is 20/20. But again, it's like these decisions do matter. And again, you can switch courses, right? People switch unis, people transfer, there's all of that. But it's just that if you're able to have that moment of self-reflection earlier on, you kind of save yourself all of that like figuring out time as well.
Yeah, I feel like especially in the UK, for me growing up in Asian households, it is very much like if you choose the wrong in quotation marks, I'm putting it in quotation marks, if you're choosing the wrong subjects, even at GCSE, that can limit your choices for A-levels, and then that can limit it for like your university. But it's like the deeper you go into that career path, the harder it is to kind of pivot on to get out.
And that's
There's really those things that like set in the stone. Like you get people that are more interested in humanities or people that are interested in science. For me, I don't understand anything about humanities.
Same here. Like, what is science?
All of that. So it's the type of thing, it's like you really get a certain mindset whenever you pick certain subjects.
And it's who you're going to surround yourself with as well, right? It's
100%.
It's going to be what community you find yourselves in, like what level of ambition, what level of like agency. I think that's very important, right? If you surround yourself with people who aren't as agentic, right? Or they just have different priorities, right? They just want to have fun. And that's a very like reasonable thing to want to do when you're like 20 or like 19 or 18. And then you're going to be, again, probably the sum of that sort of background and that context, and those priorities will become your own. Unless you're, again, very independent and it doesn't matter where you are and you're going to be a completely like an outlier and outsider, but most people are going to be at some deviation sort of who they surround themselves to, right?
And the whole point I think you're trying to get across is like self-reflection at a young age. Really thinking about why you're making these decisions. And I had a similar conversation about this with my friend the other day. And it's about, as you grow up, it's more difficult to do that because you're more influenced by external factors. A big one, like everyone talks about, but it's true, and it is social media. Like, and also like once you're at, like, imagine if you didn't reflect your whole life until you were like 25 years old, all the decisions made. And then imagine someone else who did it when they were 15, 16. Such a difference, like in basically your trajectory of your life. I think that's the main point. One thing that I did want to ask was, you mentioned things you should reflect upon, like decisions you make, for example, subjects you're taking in school. I'm actually going to take a different view here and say that it's difficult to find what you want to do in school. It's quite difficult. For you, you mentioned almost your passion was community building, like a people person. They didn't teach that stuff in school.
Yeah, that's true.
And through reflecting on your decisions, like GCSEs, A levels, you wouldn't be able to come to that. It's more like childhood experience, I think. It really stems from that. Would you agree, or?
I think so. I think, again, like parents make a big impact, like the household you grow up in, like level of pressure they exert on you probably dictates that. Even like the geography of where you're based, obviously, like the school context. So yeah, I think a lot of it is earlier on. I think another differentiator also is like, this is why I'm very big on like starting to do projects or like self-initiated things very early on. Again, it could be a startup, it could be not a startup, it could be like a side hustle, whatever, because what I always say about this is it gives you agency and autonomy over your life in some way. Meaning that, okay, if you're going to start a magazine or a blog or a YouTube channel, it sort of teaches you from end to end that, oh, you come up with something in your brain, you can translate that into a tangible outcome and an output. Meaning
like
that
independence.
Yeah, independence, right? It's like, it's agency. It's that, yes, there are things that are happening in your life. You're going to school. Your parents are telling you these things. But you have this ability to translate concept to reality. And that's crazy, right? It's like kind of a superpower, right? That you don't have to just like coast along and be like an NPC completely like default the whole time, right? Whereas like you could be like, oh, there's this thing that I want to create and I'll make it. Like that mindset shift is crazy. So I think for me, like building that nonprofit organization was kind of that moment where I was like, you know, I was doing all these activities, I was participating previously. When I created that, I think there was a mindset shift where I was like, you know, I don't have to just do what everyone else is doing. And, you know, that could be cool as well. But I could like conceive and create something. And I think that makes a big difference, right? It's like that almost trumps like your subject choice in a lot of things. It's like you have this entrepreneurial inclination, but not just that, it's like knowing you can do it in some way because you've done it before. Even if it's not commercial, even though it's not like a crazy startup, you know you're able to create something. And I think that's pretty crazy in terms of how it could shape your mindset overall.
I really resonate with that as well. I tell this to other people. I preach this and preach this. When, for example, if someone said, how do I become entrepreneurial? I don't have that thing. The main phrase I'm going to use here is creating your own future. Like you were saying, I think that's really the message you're trying to send home. It's you have the world in your hands, right? It's about the independence, like your non-profit that you built. Like you could have been the default character, like you're saying, just going through school, but you said, okay, I want to do this. I'm going to create my own future, almost like shape my own destiny, if that makes sense. Would you agree that's kind of what you're trying to get across?
I think so. That's really the essence of entrepreneurship. I think it's like one of my favorite books is by Reid Hoffman, you know, co-founder of LinkedIn, like all of these cool things. But really the whole book was around how do you apply like startup principles, like lean design, design thinking to your life. Like, right? That entrepreneurship isn't just building, you know, a unicorn in a venture-backed startup, but it's applying it, this idea of taking initiative, agency, opportunism to your own existence, to life design, to career design. And I think, that's what I really preach, right? It's like this idea of entrepreneurship is, you can kind of bend the world to your will in some like small way.
I do think it is the type of thing, and I think for me I've fallen into this trap, especially very early on, where you listen to a lot of podcasts like this, you read up a lot on startups, and you can't create your own thing online, but then it's that actually going out there and interacting with the real world. And I assume like, well, you have a lot of experience in that with social impact, you're dealing with people all the time. Is that something you felt before, where you were consuming a lot of things, but it is that fear of just going out there and doing it?
I see, to some extent I still feel it now. And back then it's like, even within like entrepreneurship, there's so many like subdomains, and there's so many things you could do that are like new and like different, right? Like trying to build a tech startup or trying to build like a variation of the same thing. It's like, you might have experience, you might have known that there's some evidence that some model of it works, but you apply it to a new context, a new country, a new region, a new like tech stack, that could completely shift things around, right? So I still feel that every day, right? It's like, there's so many like different types of things you could build where you can't really ever be a master of one. But I know like fundamentally, like I've done certain things before. I know certain people, I can ask for help. Like it wouldn't be completely unfamiliar to me, but I think, like you're always going to be in this like situation of like kind of uncomfortability if you're going to like try upskill or try to like better yourself. It's like you kind of know everything, right? And I still feel that way now. It's fair enough.
Awesome. And we talked a lot about your nonprofit organization. I want to moving to the UK. When did you move to the UK?
I guess it timed quite nicely. Like I guess when I started university, so like September 2022.
September 22. And you went to LSE, right?
Yeah.
What did you do at LSE?
International relations. Yeah.
International relations. So when you came to the UK, where did you go from there? Because you had your nonprofit organizations.
Yeah.
What was your next? Where did the story go there?
Yeah,
from there?
that's interesting. So, before then I actually took a gap year. So that's like I think also pretty big deal.
Was that because of COVID or?
I think a mix of things like COVID, like I wanted an extra year, I wanted to work. So I did a bunch of things. So during my gap year, I was scaling my nonprofit. I was like setting it up for success. I also did like 2 different jobs where I was like a full-time like community manager at the American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong. So it's like a business association for like American business. And I was doing like events, accounts, sales, like a bit of everything.
Jesus. How did you land that?
It's so cool. I guess
basically the reason why I'm asking the question is for anyone else that wants to do what you've done.
Yeah.
How the hell did you?
That was a pretty cool gig. Basically, I did like an internship during the summer, like right after my IB exams, and I was like, "Hey, I'm taking a gap year," and they're like, "Oh my god, like, what do you want to stay on?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's a really cool gig." So I did like a bit of everything, and it's like really cool. You get like, I guess, direct interface of all like these like American CEOs or business execs based in Hong Kong. Did a lot of things with government stakeholders as well. And a lot of cool socials. A lot of like, there's like a beer tap. There's a beer tap in the office, so it's like pretty sick. And I learned how to I learned how to like pour alcohol as well. It was a bit of like a jack of all trades generalist role, and it's a great team. And then at night, actually, though, funnily enough, I was working for a nonprofit in DC, Ashoka, which pioneered social entrepreneurship as like a whole field. So it's like a big network of social entrepreneurs. So those are like full-time like or consulting experiences that really like I think added further fuel to this idea that I can build things, I can do things, there's like tractability there. But then boom, I'm here in the UK, entering LSE. I think the great thing is I had a head start in 2 ways. One was that building this nonprofit organization, there's like a legible track record of I've done a thing, I guess. And then number 2 is like having that gap year allowed me to like hone that even more and like do these talks or do this work or meet new people, where I was able to really just bring that mindset right into London, right? It was like, okay, I've technically had 1 year of this adulthood, of this like weird mix of me just being in the city but not being in school. And I think London is really like that, right? It's very modular. It's very sort of DIY, right? You could really customize your own journey. Like, do you want to like just sit down on campus and read all day? Do you want to like get out there? Do you want to like travel a lot? Like, what do you want to do with your life? And I think for me, my priority was like really getting to know the city, the communities here, and I guess being that community builder as well. So first year I was exploring societies, like ran the London Startup Fair, LSE entrepreneurs. Tried a few things in startups, different like pitch competitions, went around there, like did a lot of coffee chats, probably like 50 to 100, just like meeting people, like talking to them, still like scaling like the social impact work I was doing with different communities, doing these talks. So it's like a continuation of everything I've previously done. And the art of it was that it just kept compounding, right? It wasn't that I was starting from completely nothing. It was like, I already did these things, keeps going. So I guess the transition worked really well. Right? I think it would be a lot more difficult if I had to like start from completely scratch, right? From 0 to 1.
It's always really interesting talking to people like yourselves because it's like you've moved from Hong Kong to the UK, which is obviously like quite far. And it's like you're talking about your whole experience in your gap year, how that's led to where you are now. But the one thing that you didn't talk about was actually studying at university. So my question is whenever you moved over, was the intention to study at university for the degree, or was the intention to get all these opportunities? Like, did you know before?
It's a good question. I guess I consider the university and being a student as like this like conduit for me to do other things as well. I don't think it was ever like my foremost priority, right, to be like the best student in the world. Reese
Wong, best student in the world.
But it helps like being in that student environment, like being in a university ecosystem, I guess. Like there's that big value add, and I enjoy the course. Like I look back and I'm like, why did I study international relations? Like I look back and if I had to choose again, I'd pick the exact same subject because I'm interested intellectually in like global politics. I do work with governments still, and it's like I think more necessary than ever, right, in our current like geopolitical environment. So I'm like, and it gives me a lot of free time. So I'm like, well, like I don't think I would have picked anything else, and I think it made sense. But I think the greatest thing is being in London. That's the biggest value add. But also like having at least the time to like actually do other things. And if I was like stuck at a lab, or if I was like doing something that required like undivided focus and attention, which would zap up a lot of my time. Yeah.
There's so much you've said there actually. I'm just trying to process it. It's crazy. I want to start with the coffee chats you had when you first came here. Because let's say an international person came to the UK, I was like in London, wants to have these coffee chats like you did. How long were they, and what did you actually say to these people to kind of build that relationship?
So there's a whole range, I guess. Like I was meeting everyone under the sun. It's like some people reach out to me randomly, they saw my profile, or like some people I reached out to where either it's like getting them involved in society in some way, or, you know, we could collaborate on a project. And one of the examples was like literally I saw someone also from Hong Kong, and we sort of like met up and we were like, you know, there's this gap at networking events and these types of like dinners like that are very inefficient. You don't actually get to meet a lot of people. And like, oh my God, what if we sort of designed from the ground up a networking event that actually like brings people together and is actually able to add a lot of value? And just that random coffee conversation and like spiraled into like now almost like 7 of these like curated dinners that I've been doing, where I invite people and like, again, it was literally just for LinkedIn, like DM, and we just met up in person. A lot of the people who joined my startup at the point, like Micromeetup, were literally actually all of them, all 5 of the initial team members were people who messaged me on LinkedIn saying like, hey, I saw this on your profile, like I'd love to work on this in some way, brought them on the team. Like a lot of the conversations were people I brought on as team members for the society, or people I would like catch up over time throughout the next 2-3 years, or people who ended up running all these other societies in the whole London University ecosystem, or mentors and advisors. So I think now is my approach is like setting the bar super low for like who I talk to, what I talk about, and being like very versatile of like age range, background, like experiences. Like I was there to learn. And I think what that gave me was this like vantage point into so many different careers or like life pathways, where it's like, I guess I know a lot about a lot of random things in like career building, personal branding, like, because all these people are from such different contexts, right? Where it's like their benchmark for success is so different from that other person, right? The path they took there was so entirely different, where like if you're stuck in one bubble, right? If you're only in this finance consulting bubble, entrepreneurship bubble, like this government public policy bubble, they don't even speak that same language. They don't understand that worldview at all. And I think the advantage of having talked to these people, I'm like, you know, there is some way to connect or benchmark across these industries and like the similar like strategies for success. I think that's the art of it. It's like I was able to just learn their craft in some way, a little bit, but just get an insight into their world.
It's amazing. And the one thing I love you said was right at the end, the art of it. It's an art almost, like getting to, you know, gather with someone, get a chat, get a coffee, and speak about and connect at like a like you were saying, there's some kind of similarity that you can kind of resonate with for both people. You mentioned Micromeetup. And for anyone that doesn't know, would you like to explain what it is? And the second part of the question, was that conversation you had with that person, that networking thing that you first told us about, was that Micromeetup? Did that lead to?
Part of it, I guess it's now like more merged and like rather than separate, but it's evolved a lot. The initial sort of proposition and versions of it was already around. I was already building in my first year was, you know, arriving in London, there was a lack of a campus community. There was a lack of a in real life sort of space for people to actually convene. And so I saw that and I was like, okay, how do I solve this, right? Literally. And I did a lot of stuff even before then. Like the minute I came into LSE, before my first year actually, I set up like these freshers pages. So you see these like pages where people like introduce themselves. So I set up the first one for my own uni, and then I ran that for 3 years, I guess. So like a side hustle community building project I'm still doing, I guess. But the point was I was doing all these solutions. I was running societies. I was like, okay, like can tech make this easier? That was my first hypothesis. Like, can you use tech to connect people better? So we built initial like a no code platform. I guess I was the sole founder. We built it through Bubble, and then we launched it. And I think the lesson we had there was, you know, no code is fine, but really it still needs to be good enough for people to really engage and use it. So we had people like attending events. We would host these like spontaneous meetups. That was really the core of it.
What sort of meetups were they? Also, what's a space where people...
it was like really, most of them were like entrepreneurial meetups, I guess. Like people to discuss their ideas, like like a casual like meetup like at a museum. But we found that most people like just like attending these events. Most people didn't like to host their own. So the transition from attendee to event host was really huge, and that was really hard to build. So we tried different versions of it where we did like, you know, freshers only ones and a lot of these meetups, but we realized, really I think the core of the solution cannot be technology. It's not really ever going to be, I think, a viable technology startup. But what does work are these dinners that I've been doing, where it's like very targeted, very sort of like curated, and the sort of target audience are people who would want to meet other people anyway. Entrepreneurial types, high agency, that sort of thing. So I think that's how it's evolved over time. We're still doing it for like smaller communities, like small meetups, but I think that's the lesson, is that back to my DNA, I guess, it's not around the technology, it's around like human psychology. Can you motivate people to show up to your thing? Like, why would people want to come? What are the incentives for someone to go to this meetup? Stuff like that. But I guess it taught me a lot about entrepreneurship as well. It's like how you should be talking to customers, like how do you approach no code? Like, should you not have a co-founder, or, you know, like what other people should you bring onto your team as well? And my conclusion actually is that I think I wouldn't necessarily make a good early stage technology company startup founder, because a lot of that role is to be a product manager. It's having sort of an intimate knowledge of sort of the technical product, even as a non-technical co-founder, and it's being able to ship and deliver that with like nothing. And that's sort of literally sort of, that product management aspect. And I think, my skill is not necessarily managing a product, like a technology product, but rather, again, managing institutions, starting new institutions, and this idea of like, how do you improve or iterate a team, or how do you motivate people? So I guess that's one lesson. That might change, right? I might have more experience, I might have like a different take on it, but I was like, after doing one or two of these different ideas, it's like, you know, I'm much better at scaling, I'm much better at iterating and improving incrementally than like really owning a whole technology product. I think that's like the fine line to draw whenever you're building a community, right? Often I think a lot of people will agree with like building anything is always good to build a community of people. But it's also kind of the question of like, can you force people to be together to create that community, and to what extent do you let things free flow essentially? So it's like, it's such a fine line to draw. Where would you say you draw that line of kind of like forcing interactions versus like free interactions? I think, as you've seen from some of the dinners, I'm a big sort of vouch for curation and facilitation. So some people in community building, they're like, you know, we just like collect a bunch of people and they're like, you know, self-organized and like they'll just, you know, free flow, right? But I realize a lot of the times, no. Like even in a group of people who actually want to meet, like you put them all in a WhatsApp group, like it still takes, even within the community, these like power users or these people who are just super extroverted to like maybe start the conversation. But even then, like how do they actually meet up? Who's going to do it? Is someone going to go out of their way to like arrange something? Like they're not paid for it. They're just like, they're going to be like so passionate. Maybe some of these would be like really great community managers. But a lot of the times, whoever's setting that up, you have the responsibility to be that matchmaker, to be that facilitator, that creator, the person who gives the initial spark. So the way we run our dinners and the way I think I approach community building is you actually need to be very intentional about who's in that group. But at the same time, you as the host or whoever is doing it, you need to be the one making intros, take initiative, like arrange things and make it structured. Because I think we've all been to so many networking events where it's just like, you throw a bunch of people into the room and you expect like network effects to occur just because people are physically in one spot. And that's a good hypothesis to have, but then you realize, okay, no, because people are staying in the corner of the room, they're not moving around. And I guess you could say it's on them, right? But I think, again, as the initiator for the event or whoever's doing the hosting, you also have a responsibility to make it as easy as possible and to maximize like what people can get out of your event, right? And I think the issue is people just don't think about it enough, right? They're like, it's the ROIs in just doing the event, but rather like, I think really making it good requires that like real intention behind it, which is like additional effort, right?
Yeah. So is Micromeetup similar thing to what you explained, the dinner thing?
Yeah. I think now it's kind of one of the same, like it's hard to differentiate. Like we're still doing things separately sometimes, but yeah, I think now I think the bet I'm making is like focusing on like members clubs, this category of like members community versus like a technology product. And I think the issue is, it's a slightly different value prop, right? Like one is like initially a meetup startup, like a meetup app, I guess, in real life social. Now we're just trying to build it more like a traditional members community. So it's a very different product, but I think a product that is more likely to actually work out, because I've seen over the 10 years, actually, there are a lot of like these meetup platforms. And I think what YC calls them are like target ideas, like target startup ideas. So what that means is like, they're ideas that seem initially very attractive, right? And it's a problem you'd face, right? Sam Altman's first startup was called Looped, and it was basically like a Snapchat map in-person tracker, right? And these are all ideas that are very sort of attractive initially. You're like, I faced that problem. I know a lot of people who faced that problem. The problem has been around for a long time. People I talk to seem to say they want it, but then you realize for a variety of reasons, the problem has not been solved in the past 10 years, either because people are not willing to pay for the solution, either because, there's not enough stickiness. People join your thing and then they leave. Either it's not a sustainable concept as well. So I think if you're just doing a tech app for meetups, I think that's one of the traps I fell into, was like, I'm going to build the tech around this and, I'm going to solve this problem that hasn't been solved in 10 years and more than that, right?
But there's a reason.
There's a reason I think it's so tough and hard, and you could sort of brute force it, I think, as well. But it's a tough sort of ecosystem. So,
I agree, actually. I think it's definitely a problem that everyone faces. It's almost like you're talking about matchmaking. You mentioned that,
right? Yeah.
And everyone faces it when you come to uni that first week. You're trying to find the perfect friends almost, and everyone wants to create a solution for that. And people have tried in the past, and it's just really hard to do that, like, because of genuine connection. That's just my personal opinion. But in King's Entrepreneurs, we're surrounded by this kind of thing of community building, because we've started our own thing called Launch London. Have you heard of it? Did you apply?
Yeah, I haven't applied yet, but it looks really cool.
You should apply.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, like, this potential for collaboration that is very similar. We also, that you mentioned, almost like a members club. Yeah. Exactly the same thing that we're doing. So there's a potential collaboration there. But one thing I quickly wanted to touch on was how you came up to this idea of Micromeetup. And you mentioned you went through so many different ideas. Yeah. But then, like the tech thing, you tried that, but you realized that what actually worked was the dinner thing. Yeah. And it's almost like this experimental thing. Yeah. And then you realize which one actually working. And I think that methodology, that kind of strategy that you use is something people are afraid to do, but actually works. Because honestly, this is my personal opinion. Let me know if you agree. But if you just try a bunch of stuff and just see what works and pursue that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, my initial startup idea when I came like first year was like a VR powered like project-based learning. And it kind of made sense, right? It's like I did a project-based learning organization previously. It's like, okay, how do you just add tech, right? Like, how would VR improve it? I got to the finals of a lot of these pitch competitions, but the feedback was timing, right? It's like at that point, I suppose even now, VR is still like, not something that really can reach mass market or is easily adoptable. The differential outcomes of like VR in education are also like, it's like, is it a vanity metric, right? Where it's like, does it actually give more immersion? So tried that. And then I suppose, Micromeetup was the sort of idea where I was like, okay, what's a problem I face, right? And what's something that is so obvious to me, but somehow hasn't been solved? And it's this idea of like, fractured campus community, people in these like social cliques. And I guess it's still, again, it's going to be ever present in my view. It's like a feature. It's a feature. It's a bit of a pessimistic take, but I guess, the solution I'm building now is like more like sort of focused, created, and it's these dinners that are catering to a very specific community, right? And it's people who actually want to meet, right? It's not like you're a random fresher. It's people who have a reason and want to actually connect with others. And we think that works quite well.
Where can people find out more about your micro meetups?
Yeah, I mean, you can check out the website. It's still there. You can see sort of how it's evolved. But also, if you check out like Ripples, which is the dinners as well, just check out my LinkedIn. You can see more. We're hosting a lot. We're trying to do a retreat the next 2 months. It's going to be like a sort of founders retreat in like a sort of a place in like Maidenhead. We're still exploring spaces, but it's going to be cool.
That's so awesome, man. Like you mentioned your LinkedIn. That's a big thing. It's a big thing to talk about, but I'm just a little bit on, you mentioned, let's go back to your speeches that you said you were doing in Hong Kong. Like you got invited to these things, and also when you came to the UK, people went to your profile, and that's, you said you met that guy for coffee, and then that eventually sparked the idea of the networking thing. But I think the fundamentals, the actual, what triggered it all was probably through LinkedIn, if I'm correct. So how has it been building that? Because currently you have a crazy following, like 14,000 something followers. Where did it start, and how have you built it to what it is today?
Yeah, that's a great one. So I looked back, and apparently I created my account. This is real. Apparently, it's like I looked back and I created my account in like 2013.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, okay, that's crazy. And I started using it, I guess, like 2016, 17. I guess obviously I really started using it coinciding with my organization. So like 2018, 2019, and I started building from there on. And what I've seen as the macro trend is a lot more high school students are on LinkedIn, more and more.
It's true.
Both, I guess the ripple effect started from the US, but in Hong Kong, I saw that as well. Since I built my profile, I saw it like in the UK. So that's one trend I'm observing. Like people are starting earlier and earlier. I'm seeing like some like 14-year-old or something like have some like crazy stack profile.
Imposter syndrome.
So that's one. But I think at that point it was from my organization, right? It was like, I'm posting the things we're working on. But what I think is this, like, there's multiple aspects of LinkedIn, which is super powerful. So one of the aspects on a personal level, it's kind of like a personal notice board, if you think of it that way. It's like a kind of like a bulletin board of the things you've done professionally since, like, I guess, whatever timeline you want to put to it, right? And it's like, it kind of categorizes like, what are the things, what is your life about? What have you been prioritizing, right? Since, like, I don't know, in high school. And so that's number one, right? It's like, it's a glimpse into what people prioritize, like what they don't prioritize, like what they chose to work on, what, like, like geography or background. And so for me, it's like, I guess I could put it all on Notion, I could put it all on like a Google Doc, I guess, or a CV is the other option. But what LinkedIn does is kind of like
everything.
It's like, it kind of is me in some ways, right? It's missing parts of me for sure, but it is kind of me in embodied form, in this profile form. So that's number one. Number two is that LinkedIn is sort of also, and I think, okay, back to the first point, it's also a very like motivating thing, right? It's like, you can be like, okay, this is what else I want to change about myself. So it's kind of like, a minifigure of yourself in a way, right? It's like, again, not totally accurate or representative, it might be inflated, but it's like, it's still you. Okay, number two is I see LinkedIn as fundamentally a sort of like also an intelligence tool. So what does that mean, right? You don't need Sales Navigator even, but you can sort of chart out what everyone else has ever done generally speaking, right? So it's a very good intelligence gathering tool because you can look at all the alumni ever from your high school, from your university, people in your circle, people in a city, people from a certain company, and you can sort of track outcomes. You can see the things that they've done to get to a certain point. You can see the things that they want to do in the future. You can come across so many amazing opportunities just because someone has done it before. So in a way, it's also a way to access cool things because, again, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. A lot of these cool things that come up or opportunities or spaces and communities, someone's already in it, right? So there's a underrated aspect of LinkedIn being an open source intelligence platform because you can see what everyone else is doing.
It basically gives you like the career path of that person and how they got there.
Yeah, exactly, right? You can, again, there are a lot of things that you might not be able to see, but it's a very good starting point for like information. Number 3, and obviously this is the most important part, is that the ability for it to generate inbound opportunities, right? And I think this is
I agree.
the revolution, what that LinkedIn brought, the innovation, I think, is that if you imagine historically, prior to LinkedIn, people, had all their bio data and their career data on a CV, like a printed CV,
physical paper,
a physical piece of paper that you'd go into like an office and hand to someone, or like fax them or email it to them, right? It's a private document that is like not something you'd share, right? There was no concept of personal brand. There was no concept of like this self-promotion, right? Like how you'd be known is that people know you from word of mouth. You had a very like prestigious position in some organization. You're in this like who's book that is physically in like a telephone booth that people could find. You're going to these parties and it's all like IRL, right? The innovation of LinkedIn is 2 things, therefore. 1, that it's changed the norm of career and all this trajectory stuff from a private thing into an open source public item of interest, right? And that's crazy if you think about it, because it's like, now it's a norm. If you're not on LinkedIn, it's like there's something wrong. Like what's going on? Like do you just not exist? Like you're just like it's kind of like the red flags, right?
Yeah, if you go to networking.
Yeah, and you can say it's a fortunate thing, unfortunate thing, but it means like you're kind of compelled because of the culture to be on it, at least like have at least a minimal level of like biographical information to be on there. Number 1. But number 2, if you think about it, again, the CV was a document you give to like 10 people, 50 people, 100 people. Hypothetically speaking, your profile at any given moment of time could be accessed by millions, right? Hundreds of thousands of millions. If you make a viral post, if you are able to like advertise this opportunity, that's like 100,000 eyeballs, right? Like, or more, or millions, or like technically, I don't know how many are on the platform, like 1 billion people.
With the algorithm, it shows your profile and your post to people that are similar to you as well.
Yeah, so it's like, as an outreach mechanism and as an inbound, outbound tool, it's crazy because basically you can be everywhere, like all at once, right? You're omnipresent because that's the power of the internet, and LinkedIn is the way to sort of power that. So I think for me, I've approached it in all 3 ways, right? 1, as a personal notice board that like motivates me. Number 2, as this like intelligence tracking tool where I'm able to just like see what people have done, what opportunities there are, what else I can do. Number 3 is this, again, when you post, when you engage, when you share, when you reach out to people and people reach out to you, that translates to actual sort of communities in real life as well. And the sort of scope and reach of that is like unparalleled.
I think you've laid that out perfectly. I don't think anyone else could have done that as perfectly as you. And anyone watching this or anyone listening, if you're not on LinkedIn, why? Like after what Reese has explained, there's clearly some kind of benefit and opportunity, I like that word that you use, to LinkedIn, and that's what I experienced as well. Even if you don't think it's gonna like help, just do it anyway. Like honestly, I think that's amazing. This is the penultimate question I'm gonna ask you, because we are soon running out of time. But this is a nice kind of summary of you as a person, I think, and I'm gonna call it a social entrepreneur. What does that mean to you?
So a lot of people have different takes. I think my take is, I'm someone who's an entrepreneur that is constantly looking back at social problems, looking at solving something that is fundamentally human. And I apply entrepreneurial principles, entrepreneurial thinking, entrepreneurial venture building to tackle some of the world's most pressing problems, or at least the problems I face in my own life as well. I think that's what it's about. It's how do you apply entrepreneurship in this social domain to maximize the amount of good you can do to the world?
I love that.
That's so beautifully put, because I feel like there's so many different definitions. There's like, and like it's not the same, but it's like people use like social enterprise, all of these things like very interchangeably. That's really lovely. So final question that we usually end our podcast with is practical advice for our viewers. So because we've talked a lot about, you know, you and just a lot about kind of everything you've done. What advice would you give to 15-year-old you to not only recreate everything you've done already, but to even accelerate it?
I'd say,
if you want to think about it.
I'd say start reaching out to more people and more different people even earlier. Because I think back then I wasn't as coffee chatty. I think when I started university, that was the habit I built. But back then I wasn't as intentional about it. I wasn't as proactive about it. So I think if even from that point, I had the willingness to reach out to people who are like much even older than me or had even more experience, I think I would have formed an even better picture of the world, of the opportunities out there, my own like trajectory and my motivations even earlier on. And again, I think back to the very first point we were talking about, is this like self-reflection, right? And I think back then, a lot of the things, you know, I had this, as I said, this inclination or this tendency or this habit, right? But now I can obviously think back, it's like there is a pattern, there's a reason. But I think if at that point I had the consciousness and the self-awareness to be like, this is why specifically I'm doing the things I'm doing and why I'm drawn to these things, that would be powerful.
That is beautiful. And I like the circular structure you had, linking it back to the start. Well, it's been amazing talking to you, Reese. Honestly, it's been, you're such a nice person. I can tell, like, even just by your charity, it was non-profit. Just that tells you so much about a person. And I love your mission. I love why, and I'm sure Reese agrees with me 100% here. So thank you very much for joining us today and coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.